Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today, where we're going to be focusing on the important licensing changes to Windows Server and System Center.
Good morning, my name is John Gorton. I'm the Microsoft Licensing Practice Manager at Bytes. I'm going to talk through today a recap on the existing licensing for Windows Server and System Center 2012. A new benefit, which is licensing across a hybrid environment, so the ability to move your Windows Server licenses into Azure. Talk through the changes that are coming with Windows Server 2016 and System Center, and then through the potential risks and how Bytes can help you with the transition. So a recap on Windows Server 2012 and System Center 2012 current licensing. This is just to make sure that we all understand the existing licensing mechanisms, and it will help when describing what's changing coming forward. So today we've got two editions for large and medium-sized organizations. So we've got Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Datacenter. They are technically identical. They're licensed based on a processor and CAL licensing model. So every single processor within the physical server itself needs to have a license, with each license covering up to 2 processors. As I said, they're technically identical, so each one has the same functionality, and the only difference is the virtualization rights that you get between Standard and Datacenter. So Standard offering the ability to have 2 virtual machines, and Datacenter offering unlimited virtualization rights. So when we talk around processor and CAL licensing models, here we're licensing the actual servers based on the processors in each server. So for example, this server here has 2 physical processors. At this point, we don't really care on how many cores there are per processor. So we need to assign 1 license to this server as it's got 2 processors. So 1 license covering 2 processors. The second server here has got 4 processors, so we assign two processor licenses, and then the third here is identical as well. And then for our users and devices, we can either buy user-based client access licenses or device-based client access licenses. So the difference between the two, if you've got a user that uses multiple devices, so on the left-hand side here, we've got these individuals using 2 or 3 devices. It's more cost effective to buy a per user CAL. Over on the right hand side we've got per device, where we've got a number of different people sharing the same device, so therefore licensing on a per device basis is more cost effective. Now the difference between the two is roughly 15% over with the per user CAL being more expensive than device. So if we look at the standard and data center licensing, here we've got a server with 2 physical processors. We can license that with either standard or data center licenses. So 1 license of either would license that particular box. With standard edition, we'd have the rights to have 2 virtual machines. And what we can do is stack standard licenses to allow us to have 4 virtual machines. So we could effectively assign 2 standard licenses or 1 data center license. So 1 data center license covers up to 2 physical processors and allows you to run an unlimited number of virtual machines, whereas standard offers the ability to have 2 virtual machines, and as I said, you can stack the licenses. In other words, that's a theoretical assignment of licenses to that underlying physical host. If we increase the number of processors on the server, so what's changed there is we've now got 4 physical processors. To license this box now we need to assign 2 data center licenses, even though we're only running 4 virtual machines. So Moving on to external connectors, so here we've got our user CALs for internal and device CALs again could be internal. For non-employees, so external users, to allow access to these servers we need to apply external connector licenses. So here we have a single server and we need to allow external users access to that server. So we can apply, well, we can buy client access licenses for each one of those users. But if it's more cost effective, then we assign an external connector license to that individual server. And the external connector licenses are assigned to the hardware. So it allows access to any number of virtual machines running within that server. Now, if we purchase software assurance for that external connector, we now have license mobility, and that allows us to reassign the external connector license between the three servers there more often than once every 90 days. So if we're running a virtual machine on that particular box, and that virtual machine moves between those three hosts, we could reassign the license to go with that virtual machine. If there were virtual machines running on each one of those hosts, we'd have to assign an external connector license to each one. So we've talked so far about Windows Server client access licenses and the requirement for each user or device to access the Windows Server. They would have to have a client access license. For the additional functionality of Windows Server, such as remote desktop services or Active Directory rights management services, we need to apply additional client access licenses to those users or devices. And likewise, the external connector licenses also come in different flavors, so you can buy remote desktop services and AD/RMS external connector licenses as well. With regards to System Center, so a management license is required for each endpoint being managed. So we've got two types of management licenses. We've got client MLs, so that's required when you're managing PCs, for example, or we've got server management licenses, which are required to manage servers or anything running with a server operating system. Excuse me. So the licensing of the server side is very similar to Windows Server, and that you've got Standard Edition and Datacenter Edition. And once again, it's licensed based on the number of processes within the server. So here we've got two servers with two processes, so we simply assign one server management license. This server's got 4 processes, so we assign 2 server management licenses. So both, again, very similar to Windows Server. The Standard and Datacenter suites both include all of the System Center components. They can be used to manage any server workloads. They include the rights to the actual management server, so the server doing the managing or monitoring. So again, you only license the endpoint devices, the actual server is free of charge. If you're using SQL Server and it's dedicated to the use of System Center, that's again free of charge. And you can only buy System Center Standard or Data Center with software assurance on the initial purchase. You don't necessarily have to renew it once it expires if you don't want to. And again, similar to Windows Server, the only difference between the two is the virtualization rights. So again, Standard giving you the rights to manage 2 virtual machines, and Data Center allowing you to manage an unlimited number of virtual machines. So there's a new licensing benefit coming, and this is called the Azure license mobility right. So here we've got one server host. So this is just covering how you would do it on premises. So here we've got one server host with 4 processors. We might have 25 different virtual machines running on that single server. So we assign 2 data center licenses. So the reason for 2 is because we've got the 4 processes and the fact we want to run a large number of virtual machines on that server. If we implement a second server and want to use license mobility rights, so the ability to move those virtual machines between hosts, we simply license the second server for Datacenter also to allow an unlimited number of virtual machines. Now, if we add a third server, again, we can license that with Datacenter, and now we've got the ability to move virtual machines between all 3 hosts without having to count or reassign licenses anywhere here. Now, the new Azure Hybrid Use benefit that's coming 1st of March allows you to use your Windows Server licenses in Microsoft Azure and effectively just pay for the compute power of the Windows virtual machine in Azure, as opposed to having to pay for the Windows Server operating system as well as the actual virtual machine itself. So the way this works is if you've got software assurance on your standard edition licenses, you can assign those standard edition licenses to Azure, and that allows you to run 2 virtual machines on up to 8 cores in Azure, or if you wish to have a more powerful Azure virtual machine, you can run 1 VM on up to 16 cores in Azure. Now, Datacenter has an additional benefit in that it allows you concurrent use, so you can continue using Datacenter on premises in your data center and in Microsoft Azure. So those customers that have got software assurance on data center licenses today will absolutely benefit from just being able to start using licenses in Azure and not having to pay for a second operating system. With regards to System Center, there aren't any real changes to the ability to use or manage virtual machines in the cloud. So here, System Center Standard effectively allows you to manage 2 operating system environments in Azure or third-party data center, whereas System Center Data Center Edition allows you to manage 10 operating system environments in Azure. So on the right hand side, if you've bought the core infrastructure suite through the server and cloud enrollment, you'll see that these benefits are so they're in addition to each other. So it allows you to manage for System Center Standard, manage 2 operating system environments on premises and in a third-party data center, and the same applies for the Data Center Edition. So that's only through a server and cloud enrollment when you've bought the core infrastructure suite. And the core infrastructure suite is essentially a bundle of Windows Server and System Center. So moving on to what's changing. So again, for large and medium-sized organizations, we've still got our 2 editions, so Standard and Data Center. Again, Standard offers you the rights to have 2 virtual machines, and Data Center allowing you to have an unlimited number of virtual machines. There are technical differences with the 2016 editions. I'm not going to go into the technical differences there, but there is a huge amount of collateral online. But just to say that Standard Edition doesn't remove anything from 2012, so you're still getting the same rights, the same technology. It's just that with 2016, the Data Center Edition expands on that technology. With regards to System Center, again, it's identical to System Center 2012 R2. Obviously, there's new features, but in terms of the licensing, again, identical to how it was. So the 2 virtual machines for Standard and unlimited for Data Center. So the actual changes themselves. So we are moving the licensing from a core from a processor model, so where you had to license processor and cal, to a core and cal licensing model. So there will be a minimum of 8 core licenses required for each physical processor in the server, and that has a minimum of 16 cores for a single server to be licensed. So if you've got one server with one single processor, you'll need to license with a minimum of 16 cores. Now the price of a 16 core license for Windows Server 2016 Datacenter and Standard editions is going to be the same as a 2 processor licenses today. So we'll come on to costs and how that affects you shortly, but just to say it seems like a huge number of cores, but the pricing we're led to believe is going to be similar to how it is today. We don't have pricing yet because it's not released until Q3 of this year, so as soon as we do, we'll be able to obviously analyze the impact of this for sure, but we are being told that we've got a resale price, and I'll show you how that looks shortly. So core licenses will be sold in packs of 2, and again you'll still need to license the client access licenses as described before, and those additional licenses for rights management services and RDS will still be available and need to be purchased if you want extended functionality there. So here we've done some analysis of how many core licenses will be required to license a single server. So on the left-hand side of the chart there, we've got the processors per server, and running across the top horizontally, we've got the number of cores per processor. So highlighted in blue is where the minimums are, and where the costs will be identical in theory to the licensing of Windows Server 2012 R2. Now we're talking specifically around Windows Server here, but the licensing of System Center will be identical. So again, it will be based on the number of cores, and it will require that you have a minimum of 8 cores per processor with a minimum of 16 per server. So in terms of costs, we're told that a 16 core license for Windows Server 2016 will be $6,155. This is based on the suggested retail price at the open no level pricing band level, which is designed for really small organizations. So you see, as you go beyond 16 cores per processor, the costs you'll pay are in excess of what you would pay today in the processor model. Now the impact of those costs, as I said, can range from 20% up to 60%. Right now we're seeing most customers not having 16 cores per processor, so I don't think this will have a significant impact on most customers, but certainly as the core density per processor increases over the years, this will start to have an impact on those customers. So customers with software assurance will be granted 16 cores for every 2 processor licenses that they have with active software assurance upon the release. In a similar way to how it worked with SQL Server when that moved in 2012 from a processor to core model, customers can do an inventory of their Windows Server estate, document the number of cores per processor, and if you need in excess of 16 cores per processor or 16 core licenses per server, then you can receive a grant from Microsoft for those additional licenses. Now what that means is that you will be granted the actual license by Microsoft. However, when it comes to renewing the software assurance, if indeed you've got more than the minimum requirement, then of course you'll be renewing software assurance based on the higher number of core licenses. Now, in terms of the inventory, that is something that Bytes can help with, and my colleague Dan will talk through how we can help you with that. But it has to be a time-stamped inventory using a software inventory tool. So customers with existing enterprise agreements, pricing will be locked up until the end of your agreement term, and the rights to continue to buy processor licenses again will be locked in those agreements. However, after kind of the July timeframe this year, if you haven't got an enterprise agreement in place with those locked in prices, then you'll be subject to the new core licensing model. So enterprise agreement customers coming up for their renewals should obviously consider the impact of renewing into this core model. So that's the licensing. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dan now, and we can talk around how Bytes can assist you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, John, for that comprehensive overview. Just as a way of introduction, my name is Dan Cranebrink. I'm the team lead for the software asset management part of the Bytes division. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is how we can help you understand the impact these changes are going to have on your business and your future strategy. We've managed to secure some funding with Microsoft so we can provide these engagements at no cost to your organization. And what we're suggesting, where we're suggesting we can help you, is helping you really understand where you are today from an entitlement perspective. So what do you own, and what contracts have those licenses been purchased through? And that will be a combination of understanding your internal records and procurement records, as well as getting some back-end reporting from Microsoft. So what licenses do you own from Windows Server? What licenses do you own for SQL Server, which we're extending this to, and obviously System Center at the same time. We'll also work with your business to obtain information from existing inventory tools or deployed tools that Microsoft can provide free of charge to really understand your current usage of Windows Server, SQL Server, and System Center, understand the architecture that sits on and the level of virtualization and how you're consuming it as a business. That will allow us to identify with yourselves the current position and confirm that you're licensed correctly, and if there are any risks to your business, how we can help you address them. And then really work with you and your business to understand the future impact of these 2016 changes, and how that's going to potentially impact your strategy and your renewals around your Microsoft contracts moving forward. That's available to all customers except for those who sit within the education environment. Unfortunately, we can't obtain the funding for that area. Please do get in touch with your account manager at Bytes. They'll be happy to engage our SAM team here, and we can talk you through in detail what that process looks like and how we can obtain that funding on your behalf. So that's a fairly simplistic offer from Bytes in terms of presenting it to you, but hopefully it provides a level of interest. That concludes the content that we have for this webinar. I'm going to hand over to Amy to address any questions that you may have positioned in the Q&A box.
Brilliant, thanks Dan. Okay, so if you do have any questions, if you just pop those in the questions box, that's just at the right hand side of your screen. So John or Dan will answer those for you shortly.
So the first question we have is, does SharePoint require an external connector? The answer to that is the SharePoint license itself contains the rights to external connectors or external non-employees. However, the Windows server that's sitting on and SQL, for example, you need to consider the external access to those servers. So Windows Server would require an external connector license, and typically SQL would need to be licensed in the core model to allow unlimited access rights, or if it's not public facing, then you can buy SQL client access licenses. The second question is talking around an option for temporary licenses, so use in the cloud for short-term peak loads. The answer on that is yes. So you can consume in Azure, you can pay for Windows Server as part of the Azure image, and you can effectively run SQL as a service as well. So if you've got short-term jobs where you don't necessarily want to go and buy a volume license and then assign it to Azure, you can buy those two products as a service in Azure and just pay for exactly what you use. So the next one, two questions. To confirm, single user CAL is required per user accessing any number of servers in an organization. Yep, that's correct. So if I'm licensed with a per user Windows Server CAL, I can access any number of Windows servers within my organization from any device. And only human users, not user needed for software services. So if you're licensing the individuals on a per user basis, then it is just those human users. However, if you are licensing on a per device basis, then you do need to license each device accessing the Windows Server. Does an external connector license also cover CALs? External connector licenses are for non-employees or non-on-site contractors. So any internal employees, or any employees in fact, whether internal or external, will need to have client access licenses. So you can't use an external connector for those guys. One for Dan, do we report the license audit results back to Microsoft?
Yeah, hi. So just in regard to that question, there is a level of data that needs to be provided back to Microsoft. Clearly, we're going to be sensitive to what we actually provide back to Microsoft. So we will need at some stage to share the inventory data and the overriding compliance position, but we would work with you to ensure that was presented to you in the best possible light. I think it's also, to be fair to Microsoft, they've changed their view of the world in recent times, and they're very keen to ensure that if there are any license shortfalls or additional purchases that need to be made after that exercise, that it's done with your strategy in mind. So looking at 2016 rather than looking at sort of back purchases or back in time maintenance, they won't be looking at anything like that.
And what if the customer was to pay for their own audit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good point you make, John. So if you want to avoid any information going back to Microsoft at all, then please do talk to us, because obviously we can bypass the Microsoft funding. That will, of course, be a small charge to yourselves, but we would do the same level of service, but with Microsoft not being at all involved at all.
Great, thank you. So next question is, will there still be charity discounts for charity organisations? Yes, there will be. It depends on the licensing program that you purchase through, but there are still charity discounts available for those organisations. Next one, can you bring your own Windows Server licenses to other public cloud services, so for example AWS? At this time, no, this is just an Azure benefit, so it's an Azure hybrid use benefit. So it doesn't apply to third-party services. So next one, if you don't have software assurance, when you go to 2016, will you need to upgrade the CALs to 2016? Yes, absolutely. The CALs must match the same version or be on a later version than the server they're accessing. And that's quite an important one if you've got a virtualized environment. If you upgrade a single virtual machine within that environment, you'll need to upgrade the server licenses for wherever that virtual machine can land on. So if we look back at that example of the three hosts we had earlier, you would need to upgrade the CALs to 2016, and then you would need to upgrade all of the server licenses or core licenses in the UK's to 2016 also. Can Windows Server 2016 user device CALs be used to access both Server 2016 and 2012? Absolutely, so you'll get full downgrade rights when you buy 2016 CALs through volume licensing, and that allows you to access any previous version of Windows Server. So that's the last of the questions we have so far. I'll give you a minute just to type away if there's any more questions there.
Okay, so thanks, John. So I think that's all the questions we have today. So thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join the webinar today. And thank you, Dan and John, for presenting as well. So as mentioned earlier, there is a feedback form at the end. So if you would like some more information, or if you want a follow-up call from Bytes, if you could pop that in the form, that'd be great. Other than that, so thanks everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.